When I lived in Kansas City, I had a friend. We had gone to the same college together, and we had other connections. He was younger than I. And he was a fundraiser. That is, he was the head of the development office for the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And he told me the story one day when we were together. He said the med school there at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, had developed some kind of new device, some way to make medicine work better, help people. And so my friend decided they needed money. They needed to fund this, of course. And so my friend called together some of his best donors. And they had a live demonstration. I don't know if it was a nurse or a doctor, but there was a live demonstration, and they got to see. They all saw this amazing new thing that was going to be possible to help people get better and to be healed from something or whatever it was. I don't know the exact thing it was. But it was amazing. It was beautiful. It was exciting, promising, challenging. The world was going to be a better place because of this. Well, Henry was one of the people that was invited, one of the donors that was invited to come and watch this. And he got really excited when he saw it, the possibilities. So he came up to my friend and he said, "Is it too late for me to be a part of this great new discovery?" And my friend said, "Henry, it is perfect timing." Henry, by the way, is the H in H&R Block. Henry Block was the one who watched this. Henry died this week, by the way. He was in his 90s. You saw that in the paper. Henry Block gave millions of dollars to the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He watched this. He saw it with his own eyes. And being able to see it, it was so much better than a brochure, so much better than a video, so much better than just word of mouth. He got to see with his own eyes the possibility of this new device, this new thing in medicine. Thomas wanted to see. He was the disciple that was absent that first Easter. And they told him, they said, "The Lord is risen." And Thomas said, "I will not believe unless I can see with my own eyes, unless I can touch with my own fingers, unless I can put my hand into the side that was pierced, I will not believe." And so on that second Sunday of Easter, the low Sunday, the second Sunday of Easter, they were all gathered together again, once again in the house. But there's a detail of that piece that I have always overlooked, and for the first time I think I saw it this week, getting ready for this day. It says that the doors were locked. This is the second Sunday of Easter. Now, we can understand why the doors might have been locked the first Sunday of Easter. They were afraid, and so they locked the doors. But this is the second Sunday of Easter. Jesus had already appeared to them. He had already pronounced shalom, peace, all of God's blessings be yours. He had breathed on them already that first Sunday of Easter. Just as God breathed on the creation and brought forth life in the book of Genesis. Just as God breathed into Adam, the first person, and brought forth a living being, someone who would live in the world carrying the image of God. That's your assignment, by the way, because God has breathed into you and me. We are to live in the world bearing the image of God. And the disciples had experienced all of that. The first Sunday of Easter. And now the second Sunday of Easter, they're gathered and the doors are locked again. Which really kind of makes me feel better. Even though resurrection has happened, there's still room for doubt. There's still a struggle. It's not over. We still have to struggle for our life of faith. We believe, yes, but also we struggle. We have our doubts. We hedge our bets, lock the door. And I know God's going to take care of me every tomorrow. I don't have to be worried about my life. I know that I am in God's hands. And God is going to care for me and watch over me and bless me. But, well, it might be a good idea to have a few dollars squirreled away in the bank. Just in case. I wonder, are the disciples more like Thomas than we have imagined before? Thomas, the doubter, yes, but the disciples, they're doubting too. And we all do. We live in this tension. We believe, yes, but we also struggle and there are doubts. The journey is not over. The struggle goes on. And so there they are, the second Sunday of Easter. The doors are locked. Jesus appears again. And he comes to Thomas. Thomas, the one who said, I will not believe unless I can see. I will not believe unless I can place my finger. He says to him, Thomas. Does that sound familiar? It ought to, because last week, Jesus appears in a cemetery. And there's a woman who is broken and weeping and thinks that her dreams and her hopes and her faith is dead and it's all over. And someone appears to her. What does he say? Mary. Jesus knows your name. The risen Christ knows my name. And in pronouncing the name, does Thomas touch the scars? The Bible doesn't say so. There's no indication. He didn't need to do it now. Jesus, the risen Christ, has appeared before him and said his name. And now Thomas gets to say his confession of faith. And we don't let go of that word, doubting Thomas, but we should. Because he's not any different from the other disciples. And now Thomas gets to give his confession of faith. And it's the highest confession of faith that's ever recorded in the Bible. Nowhere else in the Bible does anyone ever exceed what Thomas now says as his confession of faith. My Lord and my God. But we're part of the story because Jesus, in response to that, says, Blessed are you, you've seen. And then he says, Blessed are those who believe who have never seen. Thomas and the disciples are not first-class Christians, and we second-class. We're all together. We believe too, and we have not seen. We have heard our name. Somewhere along the line, Jesus has said our name. We have heard our name. The risen Christ has spoken to us and said our name. And we have believed. Sometimes that happens to us when we're young. Sometimes it happens when we're old. Sometimes it's a very emotional experience that brings tears. Sometimes it's just a deep awareness that the risen Christ has called our name and we belong to Him. When I was in Kansas City working at the seminary, we had different opportunities to have the 4 seminaries there. We had 4 seminaries in Kansas City, and we did some things together, joint programs, and we met together on occasion and shared various opportunities for ministry and for teaching. And there was she wasn't Methodist, but she taught at the Methodist seminary. Her name was Emily Towns. She was sort of getting launched there at St. Paul's School of Theology. She was an African-American scholar of the first rank. By that I mean she has written many books. She went on from Kansas City to teach at Yale. She is now dean of the Divinity School at Vanderbilt University. She was the first black woman ever elected to be president of the American Academy of Religion. I'm giving you a resume here to say this is a person of immense capability, immense intellect. But I remember one time we were in a meeting, and Emily Towns, this African-American professor, we were talking about something, and she said to us, "Don't mess with my Jesus." I will love her always for saying that. And I think I understand why someone like her would say something like that. She was a black woman out of the South. She grew up in North Carolina. She grew up in a culture history out of bondage and slavery, out of discrimination and segregation, out of oppression, where you have to struggle for dignity in life. And she met the risen Christ long before she became a scholar of the church. And she held on to that. "Don't mess with my Jesus," she said. I thought of Emily when I read the New York Times interview last week, in which another woman scholar by the name of Serene Jones was interviewed in the New York Times the day before Easter. And she was interviewed and asked questions about Easter and about resurrection. I thought at the time, this is going to get some press. And yesterday I noted that it was on Facebook. It's hundreds of thousands and millions of people have now read the interview and are making comments about it. Serene Jones was asked the question about Easter, and she said, "No one can say whether it happened or not." And then the interviewer asked her, "Well, what happens when we die?" And the president of Union Seminary, Serene Jones, said, "I don't know. There may be something, there may be nothing." And then she went on to say that Christians who are obsessed with the bodily resurrection of Jesus, that's kind of a wobbly faith. Don't mess with my Jesus. I remember reading one time, someone was writing about preachers and preaching, and he said something I thought was very wise and very helpful, has been for me. When a theologian gives the preacher something that can't be preached, the preacher needs to take it and give it back to the theologian and say, do it again. Dr. Jones, here, take it back. This doesn't preach. Do it again. One of the people who read Dr. Jones's interview and wrote an article which I happened to see just a day or two after it, is a chaplain in New Orleans, a Methodist chaplain, who happens to have a disease that means that he will probably live 10 years less than he would have ordinarily. It also means that he can't ever be more than 5 minutes away from a bathroom, which would be a terrible way to live, wouldn't it? And in writing his response to Serene Jones's interview, he said, I need a God of resurrection so that I will know that I will not be sick forever. You know, without resurrection, this is a terribly cruel world. Without resurrection, where is the hope? What a cruel world this would be. I met the retiring chaplain of the Oakmont Presbyterian home last year. He was getting ready to retire, and we had a few minutes together between something or another, and he told me his story. His young adult son was living down, I think, in Maryland, and he was sitting on a porch on the banister, and he fell off the banister, fell off the porch. And as a result of the fall, he will be paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of his life. This Presbyterian chaplain was getting ready to retire, and they're building a house, I think in Cranberry, not far from here, a house in which a wheelchair is able to move through the house. At least last year when we had our conversation, this man had to get up 2 or 3 times a night, every night, to move his son in the bed. Many people looking forward to the golden years of retirement, and here's this Presbyterian chaplain who for their foreseeable future, his whole life given to the care of a son who will never walk again. Don't we need a God of resurrection? Don't we need a God of resurrection who will help us to know that we are not forever going to be stuck in the same body forever? That there is a new life, there is hope, there is possibility, that when the risen Christ meets us and calls our name and gives us new life, He also gives the hope of a new day. The chaplain in New Orleans who wrote the article, by the way, it's fun to read something that it's exactly how you think. I mean, the whole article that he wrote was like, I could have said this. This is exactly how I feel. He said that if you have a life of privilege, maybe the resurrection doesn't mean so much to you. But for those of us who are broken, to those of us who struggle, to those of us who care for others, for those of us who will never have a day in which we're not sick again. Resurrection keeps hope alive. Don't mess with my Jesus. Don't mess with my Jesus. He was crucified on a cross. Nails were put in his hands and feet. A spear went through his side. And on the third day, by the power of God, he came forth from the chains and bondage of death and is alive forevermore. And this same risen Christ meets me with his scars and with his wounds and offers me the chance to hear my name pronounced and offers me hope and life now and forevermore. Don't mess with my Jesus.